Okay, I need to call to order the February 8th, 2016 Board of Education meeting. Our first item would be to approve our agenda.
I move we approve the agenda.
Thank you, Chris.
Second.
Thank you, Shannon. I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. So the first item on the agenda this evening is recognition of audience, and it appears we have two this evening. Let's see. Can you pronounce the last name?
No, Jennifer.
Okay, first is Jennifer, and I'm sorry, I can't really make out the last name. Navette, maybe?
North.
Oh, okay. Welcome to the podium. So we do limit our public comment to 3 minutes, and Janice will help by keeping time.
Okay.
Thank you for allowing me to speak to you tonight. I am here to ask, my dad was Coach Bill Freeman, and he coached here from 1974 to 1990. And I'm here basically to ask the school board to approve either the football stadium at Lawrence High or the field be named after my dad. He had such a legacy. He had 3 of his 5 players go pro. We won 5 state titles here in Lawrence. He was hired in '74. He worked tirelessly on game films, scouting opponents. He was never satisfied. He always wanted to bring out the best, not only in the students, but the players, coaches. He was tough, but he was a great, great man, and he's my hero. And he just passed away on December 18th from Alzheimer's at 84 years old. So I'm trying to honor his legacy, carry on his life's legacy. So at my request, I would like to see if you would consider honoring my dad and what he brought to Lawrence and Lawrence High School football, because it was a dynasty. That's basically, I gave you guys all a bunch of letters, articles about him, records. There was a magazine article in there written about him. So if anybody's got questions.
So typically at public comment, it's not a back and forth where we answer questions, but certainly you're welcome to contact any of us individually. Our email and phone number are published on the district website. And we'll definitely look over the information.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and next we have Tori Mitchell.
Hello, I am a senior member of the Board of Directors for the FYI Club at Lawrence High School. You received an email from me from the board and I last week alerting you to our need for continued funding. Last year, our grant of 24 years was discontinued. I would like to appreciate you for responding to our email. It meant a lot to us. To recap what FYI is, we are a peer education club and we have 7 panels that present to elementary students and up. Our panels cover the following topics: drugs and alcohol, stress, self-harm, body image, relationships, acceptance, and bullying. We also plan all school events at LHS, such as National Drug Facts Week, Great American Smokeout, and Domestic Violence Awareness. But FYI is so much more than all of that. FYI has a place for everyone. At an athletically driven high school, students are often left out of leadership opportunities. FYI provides those opportunities. Anyone can participate in panels, and if there's a topic that we do not cover, we will either create a new panel or hold an event on it. All of our panels were created by students based on their concerns for their younger peers. The panelists wanted to help avoid stressful situations that they themselves encountered. Research shows that there is a direct correlation between academic performance and stress. I am now going to share middle schoolers' reactions with you from one of our cultural heritage panels. During the presentation yesterday, what really caught my eye was one of the girls' speech. She talked about racial slurs. I hadn't really thought about them in that way before. I personally did not use bad words, but when she told us about telling people to stop, it made me really want to do that too. The prevention specialist supports the students as they develop the outline for all of our panels. Earlier this year, when we lost our funding, we were no longer able to do our panels. Because the prevention specialist trains us on the panels, they transport us, and they moderate us. They are the person that makes all of this happen. Without a prevention specialist, all of the LHS feeder schools stop receiving peer education programs. Elementary students especially love to learn from us big kids. We receive many letters asking us questions and thanking us. The loss of this program would be detrimental to our school community. The topics we covered are often not discussed elsewhere, and the personal stories from Lawrence High School students cannot be found anywhere else. To me personally, FYI has been the organization that I pour all of my time into. I love going into the classroom and seeing the kids' excitement. I love educating them on how they can choose to make healthy life choices. But my favorite part is when I receive a letter from that kid, because that means it meant something to them, and that means that I impacted them. I remember when I was a 6th grader at 12th grade elementary, and FYI did a panel. I did a cultural heritage panel, which teaches about diversity and acceptance of differences. A girl shared her story about how she learned to not listen to other people's opinion and just really, truly be herself. Over the past 24 years, LHS has had a prevention specialist thousands of people have been positively impacted. Here tonight are just a few of those people, and I'm asking them to please stand now. I know that you as a school board have many budget decisions, but this program impacts 5,000 students every year. I hope that you will keep this program in the running for funding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, we will move on to our consent agenda. Consent agenda items are those that are considered routine and are adopted by one motion unless any board member or the superintendent would request that an item be removed, and then those items would be voted on separately. Do I have a motion? Oh, and it looks like we have some recognition tonight as well.
Yeah, first I want to recognize Steve Musselman for 17 years of service and devotion to the community and its schools. And then I'll make the motion. I move the Board of Education adopt the items listed on the consent agenda.
Thank you, Marcel.
Second.
Thank you, Chris. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, Janice.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, next item is the report of the President of the Board of Education, and I do not have a report this evening, so I'll turn it over to our Superintendent of Schools.
Thanks, Vanessa. A couple of things. Congratulations to all the students advancing from their school contest, the Spelling Bee. The Douglas County Spelling Bee was this weekend. Southwest Middle School 7th grader Bryn Perrins continued a family tradition, if you read the article in the paper, by winning the Spelling Bee, as did her brother, Ethan, 2 years ago. Bryn now advances to the Scripps Regional Spelling Bee March 5th in Topeka. Hillcrest Elementary School has received a Challenge Award of Merit from the Confidence in Kansas Public Education Task Force for the outstanding performance of 4th grade students on last year's state math assessment. Challenge Awards honor students' achievement among at-risk populations, such as students from poverty and English language learners. I might add this was accomplished in the middle of the construction project, and I know building principal Tammy Becker was worried the impact that was going to have, but apparently they did learn and probably learned how to be future engineers and architects at the same time. We're fortunate that choirs from both high schools, and I'm told this is quite a rarity, from both high schools were selected to perform at the Kansas Music Educators Association State Convention later this month. Lawrence High Free State Chamber Choir and Lawrence High a cappella choir are among only 5 high school choirs selected from across the state by audition. Both Lawrence choirs will give a preview performance 7 o'clock Thursday night at Liberty Memorial Central Middle School. Concert is free and open to the public. Quite an honor for a fine arts program that we know is outstanding at both schools. Educate Lawrence, our local parent legislative advisory group, will host a presentation about Kansas legislation and school funding next week, 7 to 8:30, February 16th, Lawrence Public Library Auditorium. Featured speakers are Annie McKay of the Kansas Center for Economic Growth and Judith Grody Deedy, one of the founders of Game On for Kansas Schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is board commentary. Yeah, Shannon.
Mine's a long one. You want to go first?
Sure.
Okay.
So, I actually did want to talk a little bit about the football field, the naming.
I'm sure everybody here got emails and messages both for and against. And the against one wasn't because, to diminish his reputation, but just that Lawrence High has had lots of great coaches. And so how do you honor one versus, others who might be as deserving? I don't know what the mechanism is for this, but I'm wondering if we couldn't ask Lawrence High to maybe get a group together, talk about this a little bit, and see if that's an idea that they want to pursue in terms of a way that they might be able to incorporate everybody who deserves the honor into this. And if they did, then I think that would be the appropriate mechanism for them to come back and make a recommendation to us. So I'm also looking for a little guidance on that end of the table, just in terms of how that process might work.
So Lawrence High officials have already done a lot of that investigation and have presented that information to me, and so they would have that. They might have to do a little more work in terms of all of the coaches. There certainly are 5 or 6 that in multiple sports, but in 5 or 6 that really stand out, and whether that would come in the form of plaques that could be mounted as a wall of fame or something like that. I think that's the general direction, that if the board wanted to do something, I think that would be the recommendation that would come from the administration at Lawrence High and at both schools for that matter. Free State's history is just not quite as long, but that would be something that we could certainly, most of that work's already been done, but if that's what the board wants us to do, we can certainly pull that together and bring that back for a discussion at a later meeting.
I mean, I think that would be the appropriate way to approach that. I mean, I understand that, somebody standing here talking about and honoring her father, that's, I certainly get that. But if we are going to move in that direction, whatever the recommendation is, I think it really should come from the school, and then we should consider it and have a discussion about it. So I just kind of wanted to sort of get that out there and see what the process might be, if they want to do it.
Yeah. Easily done, and in many ways already done, and so we can bring that back at a future meeting for discussion, and you can give us direction then in terms of what that might look like.
Well, I'd actually like for them to give us direction for what it might look like, because they know the school better than we do, and they know, I think, what the appropriate way to honor somebody would be.
We can do that.
Okay, thank you. Shannon.
Okay, with your indulgence, Vanessa, I'm going to take a couple minutes to go through some legislative stuff.
Yes, and I did want to thank you. I knew I had something tonight under the report, but I know that you went to Topeka and you testified on behalf of the consolidation bill for.
I didn't actually testify.
Okay.
I went and observed, and
Okay.
I did submit comments to the committee. The timelines for submitting written testimony have been fast and furious, and for a variety of reasons, I didn't submit testimony, but I did email committee members, and I've emailed committee members on a number of these items, which is why I wanted to.
Wonderful.
give
I'm glad you're
folks
giving an update, and I want to thank you for that because I really appreciate the work that you're doing.
No, I'm glad to. I wish I had better news to report. I think the 2 positive things that happened in the last week are that the House, the whole House, rejected the move to change the way that we select Supreme Court justices in the state. Many people look at that as a way to get at stacking the Supreme Court with people who will rule in a particular way on the education finance litigation. And so there were a number of groups that came out against that that are education supporting groups. The other positive was that this week, or just today actually, on a motion to reconsider, a bill failed again that was going to place some additional reporting requirements on districts. It's information that we already make readily available on our website. It's readily available through the Kansas Department of Education website. But if whomever decided that we hadn't done it appropriately, they were going to fine districts $1,000 a day for noncompliance. So the sense was that was too punitive for. Right, but there are a number of other bills that have been heard by the Education Committee and a couple of other committees this week. The consolidation bill was one, and I did sit in on a part of that committee hearing. I couldn't stay for the whole thing. It was quite long. They had over 40 opponents that either submitted written or testimony in person. The chair of that committee said yesterday that he's not planning to work that bill further this session, with the caveat that then he went on to say that there are just too many questions that they need to get answered before they take any action on it, which in my mind is code for this is going to come back next session unless there are different people sitting in those chairs around that table. So that is, it's not dead by any stretch. House Bill 2486, that's a bill that would require districts to submit their bond projects to a politically appointed board for review before they award state bond aid. And they would be evaluating what percentage of the district's bond projects are related to direct instruction. That's had a hearing. It was on the calendar for today again, but was taken off. I expect it's going to come up soon because the chair of the House Education Committee has said that he's definitely going to work that bill and try to move it forward. I sent emails to the committee members on that one. It's just a lot of red tape. And who gets to decide what direct instruction is? Well, it's the chairs. It's leadership. It's legislative leadership. So it's not even. I think there's one member from the State Board of Education on the 5-member committee that they are talking about appointing. People who don't understand the reasoning behind why we are asking for a bond issue to do certain things would then be making judgments about the decisions that we've made and whether or not we deserve state aid for that. In House Judiciary, they've reintroduced the bill that everyone thought had died last session on prosecuting teachers for presenting harmful material. There was some interesting discussion about that one because on a different bill, they have moved forward the idea of allowing citizens to call grand juries to file charges against people. So one of the questions that came up in this hearing was, okay, so if you have a teacher who's teaching sex ed and parents or somebody doesn't like it, can they then go and use this citizens grand jury mechanism to file charges against this teacher? And the answer was not no. So that one is very concerning, obviously, for lots and lots of reasons. Senate Bill 368, I sent comments on this one to the Senate Committee on Ethics and Elections. This one is being brought forward by Chris Kobach. He wants to prevent school districts, city, and county governments from distributing any written material regarding the contents of a proposed bond issue beyond what the actual ballot language bit would be. So essentially saying, okay, you can ask voters to approve a bond issue, but you can't tell them what you're going to do with the bond money, at least not in writing. You can go out and you can talk to people about it if you're a board member, but if you are paid by the school district, you're not allowed to, distribute a flyer or do anything of that nature. Send a mailing to parents or families in your school community about what you're asking to do with the money. It seems rather backward, especially given the focus on, quote, transparency that has been going on, to then turn around and say, well, we'll let you ask for bond dollars, but we're not going to let you tell people how we're going to spend the money. So another bad idea. The one that got a big hearing today, House Bill 2457, this is extending the tax credit program that was created last session, that currently allows corporations to get a tax credit for scholarship dollars that they give to students to attend parochial and private schools. The way that the new bill is drafted, it would expand that from just corporations to also individuals. The bill that moved out of committee today on an 11-6 vote would allow up to a 90% tax credit for the contribution to the scholarship, and it would apply to, I think, families up to 100 and they changed it was going to be like 250% of federal poverty level. Now it's down around, I think, 185%. So I'm still somewhat focused on low-income students, but the content of what was said during the debate was just so disheartening. There were representatives from Johnson County, actually, Blue Valley and Shawnee Mission representatives who kept referencing that there are kids in failing schools who need this money to go to private school. Well, if you look at the documents that were created by the State Department of Education about the tax credit participants last year, I think there's 45 schools on the list. Less than 4 of them are not parochial schools, and all of the scholarship granting organizations. So all of the organizations that got tax credits were religious organizations, one of which is based in Virginia and has some stuff on their website that is basically promotes that they're teaching kids in their schools that the United States should become a theocracy. So there's a lot to be really concerned about in that. It's got a fiscal note of about $8 million, which the reviser told them today meant that they would have to revise the state ending balance on the current budget to a negative because we only have a $6 million ending balance right now. But that didn't seem to make any difference. The last one that just got filed today, and I have asked Dr. Dole for some information about this, was it's House Bill 2630, also in the House Education Committee. They're going to propose removing gifted education from special education. So, and that was discussed, I guess, as a possibility last session, but a bill was never filed. Well, the bill got dropped today in committee. So that's an update on at least the ones that I've been following. There may be some others out there, but these are the ones that are getting a lot of attention right now. Please, 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 even if you don't feel like it's making any difference, email the committee members. You know, the consolidation bill got taken off the table in part because the chair of the committee said, I got 600 emails about this bill. I'm not going to work it right now. So perhaps volume of communications is maybe a positive indicator to them that people don't support what they're doing.
What was that last one again, the Senate bill?
Oh,
what number was that? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. You know what? It just flipped me off of the screen.
Oh, it was a House bill.
Are you talking about the one on gifted education? Yes. It's 2630.
2630, thank
and it's House Education Committee. All of them were House Education Committee except for the teacher prosecution bill is in House Judiciary, and the bill about bond election materials, that's in Senate Ethics and Elections.
The House was the fun one today.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate you listening to my long
thank
commentary.
You so much for the update.
Thanks.
I really appreciate your engagement, and yeah. Yeah, please, Jill.
I know you're really keeping up on things. I know you can't communicate it with us. Would it be possible, like if you hear anything that it would help us to react to, maybe Janice could let us know. I feel like your summaries are a lot more clearer than what I've read otherwise. And, various stages, you don't get information about it. So I guess if you give us, I'd be glad to send an email if we can get a heads up.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be glad to, if that's okay, to send information to Janice.
If you send it to Janice, then Janice can send it to us. And also, Jill, I don't know if I should plug Educate Lawrence for a second, yes, because that is an advocacy group of local Lawrence parents that are working, that do have action alerts on various legislation. So if you're not on their list, get on their list, and they give action alert type items around issues like this.
Yeah, there's a couple other organizations that are doing action alerts. Game on Kansas. There's a couple others that if you look them up.
Kansas Families for Education.
Kansas Families for Education, thank you. That if you look them up on Facebook, they're sending, Kansas PTA also is another one. I have become Twitter addicted, so if you're at all inclined, you can follow all of those groups on Twitter, and they're sending out information and action alerts about the different legislation that's being heard. So that's how I'm keeping up with it, because
if you are on Twitter and you use the hashtag Kansas KSLEG Kansas Legislature or KSED, those pop up all the time.
Yeah, or follow Shannon or Marcel's school board election page on Facebook, because they're both very active, and that's how I sometimes get information. So thanks, both of you. I did want to say, and I know that I said I didn't have something tonight, but I did want to plug the Game On for Kansas Schools Walk that is coming through Lawrence again this year. March 12th, there will be a rally at South Park like there was last year in order to welcome the walkers that are walking all the way from Kansas City to Topeka to raise awareness. But this year, I think that there's a lot of people walking from various regions all meeting together in Topeka. So people will be walking from all sorts of places, not just through Lawrence, but the Kansas City group, which is the main founding group, which is one of the women who's going to be speaking with Educate Lawrence on the 16th, they are walking through our community. So if you can be out there, that would be great. Put it on your calendar. It's in the afternoon, basically, but they haven't determined a time quite yet. Okay, anything else? All right, we're ready to go home. We haven't even started. So the first report tonight, changes in the district professional learning, and for that we have Angelique Nedved and Kristen Wandra.
Good evening. Angelique Nedved, Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning. While Kirsten is getting set up, as you know, every learner is different. No two learn the same. Nowhere is that more true than it is for our teachers. Every teacher comes to the classroom with a different background, a different set of skills, and a different learning style. Add to this complexity that each teacher receives a different set of students every year with their own learning style. So if we know that students learn best through non-traditional, non-sit-and-get environments, we should also think the same for our teachers. Not a sit-and-get, not a traditional setting. We also know that one of the most valued currencies of our educators is time. Because we're compelled to use this wisely, we've been compelled to move from traditional professional development to a more personalized learning for our adults. Our district has embarked on an initiative of personalized learning for our students. Kirsten is here to share with you tonight how we're accomplishing that with our staff.
Good evening. Let me make sure I've got the right windows up here. Yay. All right, so to echo Angelique, my name is Kristen Wandra. I'm the Assistant Director in Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, and we have had quite a professional learning adventure this year. With the gift of the negotiated agreement, teachers both at the elementary level and middle school level have gained back 2 full complete days of professional learning, and so that has been a very fun journey for our teachers to figure out how best to utilize that time in those days. So to connect it to board goals, goal number 3 was to deliver that differentiated and comprehensive professional development plan. And again, we really felt like modeling what we're hoping teachers are doing for our students was really kind of our best foot forward for professional learning. So what we did is kind of that backwards design model. We started with our goals, and what we really wanted our teachers to be able to experience was not only some taking away some content from those days, either specific to their instructional practice or perhaps their content area, but we really wanted them to experience personalized and blended learning. So those were those 2 learning targets at the top. The one is that they're going to understand and apply personalized learning through that blended learning environment, and then they're also going to select and walk away with some high quality content. So what we hoped to do was to allow them to personalize their professional learning by categorizing them under 6 broad kind of topics. And as you can see, they're kind of more discrete versions of the board goals. So high impact instructional strategies, those family and community connections, our equity piece, student staff wellness. So I'll get to demo for a second, in a second, our app that we've got and kind of the schedule, but we color-coded it for staff so they could either kind of go through the content either by these professional learning strands, or they could also select into different modalities that they kind of wanted to experience. We created an infographic to try and get everybody into the new learning environment. It's super tiny, and I apologize for that. It is on our SharePoint page if you want to get in there, but I'll kind of step you through what those kind of look like. Ignite series, those little top flame ones, those are, if you've ever been to a regional or national conference, those are kind of the rage now, but they're really quick snippets of professional learning. So they're 5 minutes, they're timed slides typically, or they're timed if they do kind of portions of video. Mainly the presenter is that they're just giving quick informational tidbits. So it might be a really quick instructional practice, the way that a student or staff manages their positive behavior reward tickets, or it might be a way that they manage their school store, or one of the ways that they are developing relationships with students, something that you can do in a manageable 5-minute session. So we tried to kind of group them by category. So it was about 5 or 6 back-to-back, so kind of a 20, 25-minute session. The presenter would get up, their slides would roll, and then the next person jumps up, and it's kind of, we did it at Southwest Middle School, so the back of the auditorium was open, so staff can just kind of wander by, grab their 5-minute professional learning, and wander on. So that's the Ignite series. The other one, if you're, I'm sure, probably familiar with the TED Talk format, kind of inspirational, thought-provoking kind of things. And so those are 20-minute sessions that our staff have either developed or we had administrators present. Those are kind of those higher brow, allowing our teachers to kind of chew on some of those big topics in education. For the more practical down and dirty, we also created the knowledge shares, and those are kind of what they sound like. They're 20 minutes of just timely, right there, things that teachers can engage in that really kind of they can walk into their classrooms tomorrow and utilize. The deeper dives are kind of those traditional, longer sessions that are kind of more interactive, allowing teachers to really get into some content and some meat with a depthier topic. We also instituted a vendor hall, and I will say our feedback was pretty phenomenal, both from the people who got to participate in the vendor hall, but also the teachers and staff who got to walk by the vendor hall. So it was a collection of our community groups. It had a lot of our ESDC personnel from the business office and the printing shop, and they kind of all set up their wares in the hallway, and teachers picked up paperwork on retirement, and they accessed some payroll questions. They learned about our garden initiative, so that was really positive, and so that will continue in the future. And then we also had the personalized learning cafe, and that was an opportunity for teachers, a lot of their personal learning networks, either on Twitter or out in the wide web. They don't really have a chance in a lot of times to engage in that kind of a learning environment, so we allowed them to select in to some portion of their day as kind of a personalized learning environment. They can access our Atomic Learning account and maybe learn, how do I create my signature in Outlook, or how do I help my students really embed video into their Blackboard or their PowerPoint. So that was kind of a way that teachers selected into that. One additional piece that we had at the elementary one was kind of a collaboration station where teachers got to select into collaborating with their peers, kind of a genius hour type format. So it was a lot, and I'll tell you how we tried to organize it all. So the feedback, I will say people were floored. Teachers were so, you heard it over and over again. This was just so helpful. So I'll give you a chance to kind of look through some of their feedback. But over and over again, we heard choice, personalized learning. It was a great use of their time. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Wordle, but that's we had 215 of our staff out of the 375 fill out their post-professional learning feedback, so it was about a 58% response rate, and almost all of them had comments. So in an effort to try and synthesize what those comments look like, if you're familiar with Wordle, what you do is you paste all of that text into just a box, and basically the more a word is used, the bigger the font size it gets. So if you kind of look at it through that lens, you can see really liked in yellow, information, the session format they talked about a lot. You can see choice in there, but it was really positive feedback, and staff enjoyed the idea that they could meet their students' needs based on what they could select into. So this just kind of gives you, this is one of the questions we asked, but I had you look at the learning targets as we started, and this question speaks specifically to it. So of the 215 that responded, we had about 6% that felt like the activities for the day didn't address their learning needs and provide them meaningful opportunities for growth. Pretty powerful feedback. And as with everything, we're changing paradigms. So I thought I'd show a couple of comments for staff that were in that learning space of moving into kind of a new paradigm in their classrooms. And we will continue to support those teachers as they're moving into that discomfort space of teaching differently and looking at their classroom in a different kind of way. And, as with all things fabulous, there's an app for that. So, we're going to see if this works. we discovered Whova, and basically, as you saw with the new format change, it's kind of overwhelming. There's a lot of choice, and as you can imagine, with each of those strands of choice, there's also the strands of kind of how the content could fit my needs. So we were planning and thinking, how are we going to synthesize this? Do we give people worksheets, even though we're trying to move away from paper? And so we discovered Whova, and you can see some of our teachers using it there. This gives you some statistics. We had 2,530 agenda views alone. So this was tweeted out on our Facebook, so I thought that was kind of neat, and on Twitter. And let's see. Okay, so here is what the Whova app looks like. So I would encourage you to download this if you have a moment. You have an account, and you have been added to our middle school professional learning day. It is in the Google Play Store. It even has a BlackBerry Microsoft version, web browser version if you need it, or it's in the App Store. I will kind of give you highlights of what the elementary PD days look like because you can actually get into the middle school one. But some of the features of the Whova app, you can see it's very blurry. You can't quite see the pictures, but there's a kind of a scrolling feed of our presenters at the top. It gives kind of their title and their picture, and it gives a chance for our teacher leaders that have stepped forward to present to their colleagues a kind of a chance for a little notoriety and recognition among their colleagues. The agenda, you can see in there. It has everything for the entire day, and it's grouped by category. But then when you click into something, like if we click into this deeper dive, you can see that the very first thing it talks about is racial equity and cultural competence. So that's how staff can kind of select into those categories that I spoke of earlier. It gives you a chance to see the speakers, and speakers have an opportunity in there to put their contact information, their biography, that kind of thing. And then there's kind of that social networking component in there. People can check in, they can leave comments, they can like different sessions. Let's say this was something that I wanted to attend. I click add to my agenda, and it lets me know, hey, I'm in another session at this time. Do I want to cancel, double book myself? Oh, I'll add it anyway. And it has the opportunity for a reminder. So this was especially helpful for staff as they were thinking, okay, 5-minute sessions, 20-minute sessions, 50-minute sessions. I want to hit the vendor hall. There's a lot of planning involved. So the kind of innate capability of having the reminder was very helpful. So you go back. If you look at the very top, my agenda, once you have added and selected things that you felt like were really helpful for you, then it created a customized agenda for you for the day. So you could kind of step aside from the majority of it and just really focus on what was most beneficial for you at that time. If you go back to the home page, so that was the agenda. The attendees, again, this allowed really for that cross-building collaboration that as we have so many buildings, that teachers don't as often get a chance to do that. So this really allowed for them, hey, let's meet over here at this collaboration space, or are you going to go to this session because I might attend this one and we can talk about it later. So this is kind of an innate capability in there of the app. Logistics, this is kind of exactly what it sounds like, but this allowed us to put maps in there, and it also is enabled if you've allowed notification or your, lost my words. If you're on the map, you can kind of actually see where you are on that, so that kind of helped with some of our staff as they were navigating. The activities, this is just a rolling news feed of people are checking in for the day, liking different sessions. So again, it's kind of that natural selection. Oh, this session is really good. The one I'm not in, it doesn't really fit my needs, so it really allows people to kind of go to where they're feeling like they're going to be most beneficial. One of the nice parts is that we're stepping staff into the idea of personal learning networks. So it automatically, the Twitter feed in there has our hashtag on there, which is hashtag 497PD. So as you tweet out throughout the day, it automatically puts that hashtag in there. So we can it's actually on our USD 497 homepage. So it allows kind of staff to follow that way, people that are tweeting out. We have some photos that you saw. That's where I pulled the ones in from on the board. And then it allowed me as kind of the person in charge of the app to really send out announcements. So I could send them out both to the presenters and I could send them out to the participants. So it's kind of amazing. And you can sign in. You're automatically enrolled for the middle school PD day. Just use your at USD 497 email, You can connect your social media if you would like. Four fingers, sorry. So our next professional learning day is on February 19th. It's from 8 to noon. All of those things will be there, and we'd love to see you if you're available to be there. Thank you for valuing professional learning and allowing our teachers to do that. Do you have any questions for me?
I'm really excited that you are taking the principles that you think are important in the classroom and applying them to staff. I think that is incredible, and I do think that if you're a staff person that really enjoys this experience, then you're going to be more likely to say, I want to create that for my students. So I appreciate just all of that work that goes into forwarding the personalized learning initiatives that are in our district. So thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely, thank you.
Great work. Okay, next we have the capital outlay budget and project planning. We always make Kyle talk about this kind of stuff after that, right? Sorry, Kyle. For that, we have Kyle Hayden, Kathy Johnson, and Tony Barron. Can you make this a personalized learning experience for us? Keep us engaged.
It's personal to me. Actually, one of my things I'm going to mention is personal to other people too, especially when we take projects off the list. It becomes very personal to some of our principals. But okay, Kyle Hayden, Assistant Superintendent of Business and Operations. For those of you who have been on the board for more than, I guess, 6-7 months, this will be a little bit of a repeat for you. A lot of the slides are the same, a lot of the content's the same. We've kind of, I think, standardized, this plan, the approach we take with it. We tweak a few things, but a lot of things stay the same. So, but for those of you who are new in particular, it's good to hear some of this information because the capital outlay budget is much different than the other funds, in particular general fund, and it's really important for you to understand that and for our general public to really comprehend that those dollars are different. So the capital improvement plan really kind of started in its current form 4 years ago. And when we look at this, while we're looking at not only the facility needs and from a maintenance and renovation standpoint, but also the purchase of our equipment and a lot of purchases that are happening in the last couple of years with furniture, especially with the blended learning initiative and the movement with flexible learning spaces and learning pockets. So those are the components of this. When we look at the capital improvement plan, there's a lot of considerations: the safety and security, the operational efficiency. We really take into consideration equity to make sure that not just one school is getting all the attention, and that we're kind of spreading things around year to year. Even though we also have to take into consideration if some facility needs a lot more. When we look at the plan, we're looking at this current year, which would be 2016, and then we look out 3 more years. So you'll see the plan going out till 2019. Something that's, I think, really important with understanding the capital improvement plan is that it's flexible and that it's constantly changing. It's fluid. What we know today may be different than what we know next week. And, our conversations, especially Tony and I have, especially with the construction process, we learn more and more all the time as our architects, our engineers, our construction management teams are in buildings seeing stuff, uncovering stuff. Weather uncovers stuff for us. So there's a couple items that are on the list today that weren't on the list even a month ago, unfortunately. So we're constantly reacting to those things and then shifting things, and that's what I mean about disappointing people, because sometimes that shifts their project out maybe a year or two when we were hoping to get it in sooner. So any case, so what you see today may not be what you actually approve in 2 weeks. There may be some slight adjustments, not a lot, but some slight adjustments. Most of this work does occur during the summer. After you guys approve this, items will come to you that are over $20,000 that get bid, and for your approval, specific items that will come to you for approval. So, and I just mentioned that as far as the bid requirements, the statutory bid requirements. During the bond construction process, it's a much more complex for us than it had been actually before 2 years ago. Because what we're trying to constantly do is weave the capital outlay plan, the capital outlay dollars in with our bond dollars. And, fortunately, we've had, our bond sales have created some additional dollars for us in premium and interest. And so that's another, I guess, a funding source above and beyond just the $92.5 million for the bond issue. So that's been really beneficial. We go back and we talk about every year how we have the promise for a no tax increase on this bond, and that was 10.577 mils. That's lower. It's been lower every year. It continues to kind of drop. I think we're just above 10 mils now, and we project that to even drop just a little bit more next year. And we've kept our capital outlay mill levy at 8 mils. There's a time, and you'll see the history, that we were below 8 mils, but it's been at 8 mils for the last 4 or 5 years. Kathy's going to go into talking about the capital outlay fund specifics as to what can be purchased with that, and kind of give you a history as to our mill levy and the kind of money it generates.
Good evening. So I'm going to go through a few slides that kind of give you some spending history of this fund, kind of what we've done, and cash balances in there and some things so you can kind of get a picture of that. For the most part, the revenues in your capital outlay fund are mill levy revenues. There's some miscellaneous income, a sale of property, something like that. But for the most part, what's going to generate the dollars for you to be able to do anything out of this fund is the mill levy. We have the maximum authority for perpetuity of 8 mills. That doesn't mean we have to levy 8 mills every year, and in fact, many years we've not historically. But we now have a resolution in place that we don't have to keep going back to do these 5-year increments. That 8 mills generates approximately $8.7 million for us each year as new money. Looking at that, you can see this is sort of that history. We did approve that resolution June of 14. It does have some expanded permissions. We've not necessarily gone into much of those expanded permissions, primarily because of all the things on our plate for just construction kinds of things. Some of those expanded permissions are some performance uniforms, actually upkeep of equipment, some things like that we couldn't do before out of capital outlay. But our mill levy, you can kind of see, has been published at 8. When we get our final certification with the county, we want it to be slightly less or right at 8. We don't want we want to be able to certify it for the full amount as much as possible. At 11/12 was the last time we were at something under 8. So that's just sort of a slide of that history. The following are some expenditures or the actual statute definitions of what can come out of this. Some of the expanded permissions now that are new is some software, performance uniforms. We can now do some upkeep of fixed assets out of capital outlay that we used to not be able to do. For example, upkeep of vehicles we couldn't do out of capital outlay. Upkeep of equipment we couldn't do out of capital outlay. So with our expanded permissions, those are some things that we can do. This ineligible list are still some things we cannot do. Obviously cleaning supplies, balls, bats, things that they consider consumable or supplies. Insurance, even though it's for property, textbooks, some things like that. So there still is an ineligible list of items, but it's a little bit smaller and the definition is a little bit expanded for us. Just gives you a little bit of information about cash reserves, and I wanted to talk through that because this is one of those funds that's going to have a high balance July 1 because it's solely reliant on taxes. We don't get a distribution June and then not again till December. In most districts, it's January. Our county has given us a special abstract permission in the middle of December. So what's in July 1 really needs to cover us for 6 months of cash flow. So what I have given you here, and keeping in mind that an HVAC or a roof could be $500,000 to $1 million, it's important to make sure that we still have enough on reserve for something like that. So our average before that tax distribution over the last 5 years, that low kind of went to 3.8, is kind of our average. The high has been 5.9. The low, which is actually this year, is 1.2. So we were down to $1.2 million in capital outlay unencumbered cash before we got that new tax distribution. That number is kind of going down for us. If we were looking at it a year or 2 years ago, those numbers would be higher. So that's something that's changing on us. If you look at the average amount of expenditures, just 6-month expenditures from July to December, it's about 4.2. Ideally, then, backing into that, you would hope to have not much less than about $4 million July 1 if you're continuing to spend at the same rate we've kind of historically spent. So this slide just kind of gives you a little bit of a high, low, and average that we need to think about as we plan this plan out. Average expenditures in total of our capital outlay, average is about 9.2. We've had as high as 14 and as low as 5.3 over the last 5 years. Some of that really big swing was because of bond issue planning. We didn't spend a lot till we had the plan in place, and then we spent a lot kind of following that. But the average has been about 9.2. In the list that we're looking at this year, the total expenditures that we're kind of targeting is about that 11.467. Again, that could move. Again, that is planned for 15-16. Some of that doesn't end up happening and will end up carrying into last year. Some of that was things that didn't happen last year and carries in. But spending-wise, that's kind of what our target is on the plan that Kyle's going to share with you in a minute. The next slide is sort of a table history slide. Kind of goes back to 09-10, where we had a mill levy of about 6, and then you see 7, and then it's gone to 8. If you recall, in this particular fund, we publish very high so that we have authority to spend revenue that might come in or might not come in. If we don't publish it high, you can't spend the dollars beyond what we publish in this number. We also know that this number we aren't going to have down that low because we just talked about a need to have it a little bit higher. So when we plan, we take that published and we look at what we're going to maybe be able to afford and where we want cash balances to go. This reimbursement is just what we've received to date. You'll see that in the past our miscellaneous income has been higher, so we can anticipate that that will be a little bit higher and probably bring this up to that $4 million mark that we're looking at. So this is our beginning cash. This is our taxes. To date, that's the local revenues that we have. With this much as resources, this is our planned spending before June 30, kind of in this fiscal year, this balance being at 3.6. Again, this is going to be higher, so our balance will end up at about that $4 million mark, hopefully a little bit higher than that. That carrying forward then, you're looking at new revenues. Ideally, you'd have to stay in here to keep this. Obviously, there's a lot of variables that could change. You know, we don't know what local revenues are. Piece of property could get sold, you could have a large donation, there's just a lot of variables. So that's why this is a very fluid plan, constantly moving, constantly in combination with what the bond projects are doing so that we can kind of move as needed, but we still have to have a sort of a parameter to work within. And so that's kind of what that looks like. Any questions with that? I'm going to turn it back over to Kyle here in a minute, and he's going to give you some information about what we've got in that plan for the 11.4. You will see that for the future years, the target amount or the amount in the plan is higher than 8.7. That will be something we'll have to continue to tweak and work through as to what we can do, can't do, where our cash balances end. But we're kind of weaving that all together, and again, we monitor it constantly so that as it changes or moves, we try to zig the other way and make it all work. So before I turn it over to him, any questions on just kind of where our fund is sitting, where we are with balances, averages, anything?
I have one, and that is if we were to try and take full advantage of the expanded permissions for what can be spent out of capital outlay to take pressure off of the general fund, like what's that amount to if we were to try and take total advantage if you were stabbing at that number?
You know, I couldn't even begin to tell you because right now we've committed this fund to everything that's not within those expanded permissions, so something on this list would not be able to be done to relieve general fund.
Okay.
That's bottom line with that. And then you would look at it and you would determine whether are we spending anything that's a capital expenditure. Most of our equipment we aren't. We're trying to do that out of capital now. So then you go to things that maybe there's need, band uniforms, you know, athletic uniforms that schools are maybe trying to spend out of their general dollars. Again, that may or may not amount to a lot of money, but it's going to have to take something off the list that's currently capital and not have it happen. Because right now the commitments that we have out there potentially as needs are pretty high. So you're going to have to, whatever you add on, you're going to have to take off, and it's a balancing act. So we can evaluate that. But you'll have to keep that in mind. No different than our general fund. We're doing the balancing of that.
Sure.
So,
A general answer to that, Vanessa, is that the change there was lobbied because of uniforms.
Yeah.
Small districts, that's really difficult to buy band uniforms. I mean, it just really is. It's just hard. And so primarily that was an add-on to help with uniforms. That hasn't been as much a challenge for us as it's been in some smaller districts.
Okay.
I think the other big one, uniforms is the biggest one. The other one I think of for us could be some things like upkeep on equipment, some maintenance things that custodians can now be paid out of capital if you wanted to, whereas they were not allowed to before. So some of those kinds of maintenance of building costs could, but again, then if you have lots of room in capital, that's one thing. If you don't, then you're going to have to weigh that out. But the other big one was some custodial stuff, I guess, as I think about that.
I do think as we plan for our budget, I mean, we're going to have to make a lot of hard choices. We're not getting any new money, staffing costs increase, benefits costs increase. Lots of things are happening. And I do think, I personally don't want to take off the table looking at how we could maximize some of the benefit here. Not that these capital improvements aren't important, because again, yeah, it would be hard to look at that list and be like, oh, no, that's not important. We don't need to replace those windows or whatever. I mean, I'm sure that all of this is important. But I do think we should keep that in mind as we go forward with our budget discussions and remember that there is a potential to shift some of that, because that hasn't really been an option for us in the past. And, yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, and there are some things that we can look at if that's a direction you choose to go.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide, and Kyle's going to take you into what that actual detailed list looks like.
So this is the document. Like I said, it's a similar format as what you see in the past, and it's built by school, and then there are different columns for the different years that we're looking at here. And one of the things that, and to Vanessa's question, in the statement I made earlier, we're stretching things pretty far with this plan. The bottom lines that you'll see for each year, which I'll just go all the way to the bottom real quickly. When you look at that in comparison to what Kathy just showed you, we talked about this year being about 11.5 million. That gets us down to 3.6 balance in our capital outlay, which it's pushing that a little bit. Still a little room, but when you're talking about not getting funds for a long period of time during the course of the year, you could see how quickly we were spending it down. And we're more apt to spend it down now and in the course of the next year too, as we're spending so much and committing it directly to a construction project where we have alternates that we've taken and we're spending capital outlay dollars on them. So that it's much more likely to happen. And but you see, next year we have a plan for 10.5 million, then 10.5 million. Then in 2019, it's way up there. That in particular is usually you see that in this plan when I present it to you, because I put items out there that we would typically not pay cash for, where it would be like a complete system replacement. A HVAC system replacement like at West, and you can see that right at the bottom. $2.5 million, the item all the way to the right. There's another one for Lawrence High School, $2.5 million for HVAC improvements, and it's really, that's not a real concrete number. It's kind of a shot at at what just we know there's a high need there, but we haven't really pinned it down. And you also see some big numbers for major building renovations that would be associated with Lawrence High School. With Free State as we look out, because a couple things, demands on number of classrooms and just educational program needs that we have. And so that, when you look at 2019, it's going to tie a little bit to the conversations we're having about the master planning for our secondary schools. So when you see that big number, you hope that, through a master planning process and then the potential of another bond issue, that those needs can be taken care of, and so then you could take them off the list of the capital outlay plan. But they're just big numbers. They're not like, and they're not like very specific as to what needs to happen to make the improvements. But it's just kind of a placeholder, if that makes sense.
Can I ask another question real quick, Kyle, while you still have that up? So according to the slide Kathy showed, it appeared as though we could comfortably spend this 11.4 and be okay, but that the following years we had really kind of a cap of 8.7 million. So again, there would be things that would have to come off of here to make it work financially.
Exactly.
Okay.
And what has happened in the past is that what you have approved is not what we spend. Because either bids come in lower or we don't get to a project, or we decide, okay, we're just not going to do that. We're going to forego doing that for now. And so then those dollars don't get spent, and so the balance stays high, which allows for more carryover, which allows us to continue to spend at a higher level, if that makes sense. So, if we only spend, $10 million, well, that's going to carry 1.5 over more than we had, which will help cover the 10.5 that's planned for next year.
Okay.
So it's all about carryover. It really is, to help us cover the long-term expenses. So when so the approval we asked the board for is not necessarily for every item on the 4-year plan. It's the current year. That's what we're focused on. We're focused on approving what's in the queue for 2016. And we know we can fund that. It's a matter of looking out. It's questionable. Can we fund the other stuff? We don't know that until we look at next year and what we have carried over.
I appreciate that the plan takes into account when you know there's a need, you put it on there and you plan it for at least some point, and then you prioritize with the current year. I think that works really well, and it's a vast improvement from how we used to really not do this at all. So.
I asked Tony to come and talk a little bit specifically about facilities and operations and some of the changes we've had there as the plan has evolved over the last couple of years, especially since Tony's been here, and then talk maybe about a couple specific things and how he's been collecting information. So I'm going to turn over to Tony for a few minutes.
Tony Barron, Director of Facilities and Operations. Yeah, Kyle and Kathy have done a good job of guiding me in the direction that we all would like to see. We used to lump sum everything together. In 2013, my line item, the district-wide facilities and operations, you'll see right now for this 2016 year is $800,000. Before, I believe 3 years ago, it was 1.675 million, and that was just kind of lumped together, and then we kind of found a place for all that. So what we've been doing is try to get really site-specific with our projects, which has taken this number down to 800,000. So that instead of putting it in one line item and deciding where to spend it, we're actually going out and identifying schools where it needs to be spent, which has taken this district-wide facilities and operations number down. It's not as general as it used to be, but we still have to carry some large numbers for those just in cases that happen over a 12-month period. So we still carry an $800,000 line item just to be safe in some areas that we haven't identified yet. And just to go back to some of the points you guys have been talking about, so let's talk about the building requests. Back in August, I sat down with the principals and admin assistants. We created a capital project icon on our school dude work order system, back to our school dude work order system, which I really like to talk about. So anyway, we put a capital project icon on there, and I sat here in this room in August and said, if you have a capital project, click on that icon and add it to the list. And so I continued to work with them. Elementary schools weren't affected much. Every one of their schools are kind of getting in touch through the bond. So it was more the middle school and the high schools I've still been working with, but the middle schools in particular. To date, I did some quick math. I'm going to go through just quick numbers real quick. I have approximately $3.9 million that's facilities and operations that's responsible for out of this capital improvement plan. About $900,000 of that is going to be managed by the bond. So that leaves about $3 million that facilities and operations is responsible for this fiscal year. We had $6 million in requests. So that kind of sums it up of kind of how we end up. And Vanessa, kind of to your point of trying to find that balance is, we have $2 million more worth of requests out there that we can't fulfill this year from the buildings. So it's really a prioritization. It doesn't always look pretty when you're doing roofs and other items, but it's a must. It's very makes for a comfortable atmosphere when you have to do some of that stuff. So, but there really has been a work in progress. Like I said, Kathy and I and Kyle have been working to try to identify this. to have it in line with our other system, which is B+, which Kathy uses in her financial management of it. So we've tried to align the wording and everything to come together so we can kind of identify and work back and forth with it. As she said, we have, I think I have over 75 projects identified, and we have a little over 70 calendar days to get them done. You take the weekends out of there, we're looking at roughly 50 to maybe 60 working days to kind of identify all these. So it's very important that we identify and specify where we're at and what we're going to do, and our goal is to communicate back to the buildings in advance. So I don't want late requests coming in and that they really need. We want to identify now what they need and what we can do. Plus, you got to go out to bid and get everything planned. So that's kind of how my part in this. We're the action team, kind of. We're the one who makes it happen. Kathy and Kyle, like I said, have been great as far as giving us guidance on where we've been and where we got to where we are today.
Thank you.
So I want to talk just about some specifics here really quick and go through some of the items. When you look at Deerfield and the items you see there, those have been approved by the board already through the bond project approval. So those are the things that were identified as the above and beyonds that we couldn't cover with our bond budget, and we identified them, and there's a price tag for them specific to those, and they're going to happen. So Deerfield and Schwegler are both that way. You'll see a pretty good list of things that we've already committed to. As you will go through here, you see Tony's F&O budget. You see our furniture, fixtures, equipment budget. So this is where all of our furniture is coming out of, and you can see we've had this 1 million number plus in the last couple years targeting our furniture. You see next year it goes down a little bit and then kind of continues to go down as we wind down our construction projects. So we're flipping a lot of furniture, and a lot of it was necessary, obviously, and then just changes in personalized learning, the blended learning initiative, flexible learning spaces. Can't forget cafeterias and kitchens and things of that nature. So there's a lot of things that are happening there. Library media, another one. Big chunks of money go into flipping a library media space to make it the type of, the maker spaces, the, more collaborative things, the soft furniture. It adds up a little bit. So those types of things are going into that big number.
Can I ask a quick question on that? Because I'm interested. I know that we've had some discussions about the speed at which we want to move forward with personalized learning and blended learning classrooms throughout the district. And I know that there are a couple different costs for that, including the professional development side that's teaching and learning, and then also the furniture side that is basically you guys. So can you help me understand what these numbers do in terms of allowing that initiative to kind of keep moving forward? Is that taken into account on these lines? And by the end, I guess as far as like the furniture costs are concerned, does that line up well with teaching and learning's professional development costs?
It does. I mean, so when we look at what we had done in the last couple of years is actually put in a line item that said blended learning, this amount of money. What we ended up doing, what you ended up doing from an accounting purposes was that all of it was getting blended together, essentially. So when you had, because it was all the same type of furniture. So what we were doing for a blended learning classroom was actually exactly what we were doing when we were flipping a whole building, whether it's Sunset Hill or whether it's New York or whatever, with the new blended learning type of furniture. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. Sure. So we buy the same furniture regardless, and then it can be used however it's going to be used based upon the speed at which we're doing the professional development.
Correct. So
that helps.
We're trying to, if anything, our furniture is going at a faster pace than the blended learning initiative by quite a bit. So what we're, trying to do, and actually I sat with Paula for, every time we meet every 2 weeks, our conversations specifically around furniture and the types of things that she's working on. And if anything, we're trying to figure out, okay, can we do everything we want to do, which includes trying to flip an entire building, even if it's not all new construction or even if it's not all renovated space. So specifically, Sunflower, Broken Arrow, Prairie Park, Quail Run, places where if we had a new classroom, we just flipped it automatically with new furniture. But if it wasn't new or even wasn't, touched with paint or carpet, do you flip that furniture if it's not a blended learning classroom? Well, we're trying to as a faster rate as we can so that all classrooms are set up for that environment, whether they're officially blended or not, because we want to encourage that type of teaching style. And we know furniture makes a difference. So we're pushing it.
Great. Thanks.
When you look at another key thing to look at, district-wide leases. So this is where you see we have an energy lease, we have the outdoor athletic facility lease, we have copier lease. Then we have the Apple devices from 2014. That was a lease that we have 2 more years on. That was for the teacher laptops, teachers, administrators laptops. And then you see a to-be-determined lease technology. So we have a placeholder here in this budget for $750,000 that could be attributed to a 4-year lease for devices to advance the personalized learning initiatives. You obviously haven't approved that yet. There's a board report that will come potentially at the February 22nd meeting where IT, Jerry Kimball, will talk to you about that board goal, specific to that board goal, and will tie back to this number. So, and that just happens to be the same day that you guys approve this budget. So it's not that you have to approve, whether you're going to, buy a whole bunch of devices on the 22nd, as much as this is a placeholder for that number. So, I guess the worst case scenario is you're not approving you approve up to 11.4 million, and we don't spend that much. Kind of goes back to what we talked about before. So,
I have a question.
Yep.
So the outdoor athletic facilities, when is that lease up?
2019 is what yes. So this would be the last, hopefully next year you see a blank next to that in 2020. So it won't be filled in. Yeah. Looking at other things here, you can see the technology budget with just other things. So it's just other mobile devices. We're going to need a phone system upgrade sooner rather than later, I think. Other tech equipment, because there's a lot of projectors that we're flipping, and so those short throw projectors, that's in that number, that 600,000. We're obviously doing that examination of our wireless network, and so you have a pretty good sized number there to upgrade the wireless network when that study comes back, because we know we're going to need to do that too. Some other things I wanted to point out to you along the way here. We look at the playground you approved with Hillcrest is on there. This question's been asked even today. Langston Hughes. I'll make sure you guys know what this is going to happen. So Langston Hughes, if you remember, go back 3 years ago, we did, I guess we call it a land deal. Alvamar Inc. and ourselves with the Kansas Department of Transportation and a local developer of the Langston Commons, Langston Heights division that's going in. That's a commercial residential right around Langston Hughes. They needed access, and so they needed a piece of our property to get access off of Bob Billings. So we sold them that. They're in the process of building those houses out. They're actually building that drive now, coming off of Bob Billings, headed north. Basically, it's right along the edge of our property, and so as that's going in, people are beginning to ask still, when are you building the drive that connects to that property, that development, that commercial development and residential development to what would be the south west side of Langston Hughes. It's still 2017. It's been 2017 for 3 years. So it's still targeted $250,000, and we haven't designed it, so I haven't hired an engineer to look at that yet. We will, but it'll probably be next fall before we actually get into the actual design of that. We've committed to making that road a curbed road with a sidewalk that connects from the school into the neighborhood safely. That was something we committed to with the city and with the neighborhood. So that plan still exists, and I want to make sure I point that out to you because undoubtedly you'll probably get questions if you haven't already gotten them. So, some different things that are going on. You see just additional parking lot improvements at Lawrence High that will continue into the spring and summer. I want to point out to that, Lawrence High, we talked about construction of the addition and the entryway being done in March. You'll still see a lot of activity out in that front parking lot because it won't be complete. They'll still have an overlay to do, and then there'll be some other asphalt work that's done even into the summer. Schwegler, another one of those where you had a big chunk of approvals that went into that the bond project to help cover the costs of that project. Some other notes here.
Kyle, I had a question about the wireless access survey that we're doing. Do we have a estimated completion date for that investigation?
I was told May. Is that what you're looking at?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to back up. There was one here. So under ESDC, the Facilities and Operations Warehouse, so we're still in conversations about that. I know we've had some correspondence regarding that. Expect a report about this item specifically sometime this spring. We have done a study. That's a study of all of our property and all of our facilities to look at what's needed out of a facilities and operations building, what's needed out of a warehouse. We've assessed even how this relates potentially to transportation services and needs there. So it's a pretty comprehensive look at what we have and what we need, not only in the short term but down the line as far as building something like this. And purpose of that really is to what can we do to save us on the general fund side with having more efficient operations.
I'm really glad you said that because that is the reason to look at doing this, is that we could save a not insubstantial amount of money. But in order to do it, we have to spend money to have an appropriate place to do it. And so when we are getting beat up about spending money on capital projects by people in Topeka, this kind of spending and planning by our district is designed to save the state money in the long run, and to save us money so that we can direct more dollars into our classrooms instead of spending it on things like not being able to purchase in bulk because we don't have enough places to store it. So I just want to emphasize how important it is that we are looking at every possible thing that we can to make our district more efficient and save money. And I really appreciate that.
Those numbers in that line are pretty loose also, just because we haven't completely defined what that would look like. And if we did do something, it wouldn't be probably something that we would literally write a check for and pay cash. It would be something maybe we would do on a payments, at least purchase type of thing. So, I think that was the bulk of what I wanted to kind of point out. So the other thing is when I said that there was unknowns that came up, two specific ones. Southwest Middle School, a roof replacement of $375,000. As of a month ago, we didn't know we really needed that. Sunflower, same thing, a roof repair replacement. Obviously, those buildings are adjoined, but significant dollars going to something like that that's unexpected and obviously all of a sudden really pushes your plan.
I noticed that the gym floor item is pushed off until 2019. Does that mean we were able to repair it in the short term?
Which one are
Is
you
it
on?
the Southwest gym? Isn't that the one where we had the roof leak onto the... Oh, no,
That was actually South.
That was at South? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I had obviously was confused. Okay.
We had a leak at West, too, so you put them together.
Good. And at Cordley. So we replaced, yeah, that one too. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So, gang, the idea would be that this is a lot of information, and so you're just getting it tonight. So take it home, chew on it, email us questions. We'll bring it back in a couple of weeks and have further discussion if we need to. You're approving the plan. You're not approving specific items on the plan. So think big, think globally. But if there are things on there that you don't think should be a priority, or stuff that you think we've missed through the grapevine you may have heard, now's the time to get that in front of Kyle.
I do have a quick question. Tony, for the identified needs at the secondary schools, are you feeding that information to the master planning consultants? And then at the same time, is the information that they're gathering coming back to you before, at this point now, before, the reports come back in, just to help coordinate this long-term plan relative to whatever we eventually do for the bond?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we've done is, you're talking middle school specific, is that right?
Yeah,
middle school
primarily.
specifically. So I'd met with them, all principals in August. I sat down with all 4 middle school administrators in December. And when you're talking master plan, I'm assuming you're talking to the schools and having Gold Evans. I'm sorry.
The actual
Gold Evans. Okay, that master planning committee. Mm-hmm. Yes, I have brought stuff back that I've heard from the buildings, and I'm giving it to Kyle. And he's kind of been the main go-to for Gold Evans right now. So yes, the stuff that is coming, I'll evaluate it. If it's something we feel like we can do, it's fairly short-term, fairly quick, we'll turn it around. But if we feel like it belongs in the master planning, I definitely have made him aware of it. And we actually had gone through the list and kind of pushed a couple things off to the side, knowing that that's coming up.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? Well, thank you. This is such a better system for how we do this and how the board gets the information than we've had in the far past. So I really appreciate this and your work, all 3 of you, on all of this. Thanks. Oh. Okay, so you guys get to stay.
2 of us do.
Right. Delight us again.
One gets to run away. Okay, so this, I'm going to shift gears and talk about different money. So this is going to focus in on our general fund dollars and kind of giving an overview of what that looks like for us, and then and current status, and then looking forward for planning for next year. And this is coming a little earlier than normal for this. Usually you give you a budget report in November, December, which we've done that already. And then we wait typically to like May or June to kind of give you the budget plan and talk more about it. Given all the conversations that are out there, you hear, what Shannon's talking about as far as the legislative updates and things. Thought it was, a more pressing issue to get in front of you and to kind of chew on some things because we don't have new money. And we have decisions to make as early as this year to figure out how we're going to make the budget work for next year. So this is going to kind of walk through that, and Kathy's going to do most of the talking on this one.
Okay. So the first part of this will be kind of an overview of just kind of our budget, where some of our spending is, kind of some things like that. Talk a little bit about cash balances, and then go into kind of planning and assumptions for 16, 17, and how we're going to kind of progress. So the first bit of information, and this is going to be some high-level overview, but I think it's important to kind of know what we're talking about when we talk about which budget we're actually looking at. So just very high level to start with, when you approve your Code 99, there's a lot of various funds that make up a total school district budget. And we have our general funds, and then we have what we call special revenue funds, and there's a whole array of funds there. Adult supplemental, food service, general driver's ed, federal, professional development, and then there's our debt service funds. And all of those are what make up a school district budget. And it's important to know what fund you're talking about when somebody's doing percentages or comparisons or things like that, because, depending upon what that denominator is and, what you're talking about, those percentages and information can look different. So this is kind of high level, your Code 99. What we're going to talk about today is primarily what we in Lawrence would look at as operating funds. And when I talk about operating funds kind of in my mind, and when we plan kind of budget-wise, we're looking at everything that's in our general or supplemental general fund, And all those special revenue funds we transfer to. So a large piece of your general funds are actually transfer amounts outside to vocational, to special ed, to virtual, to bilingual. And so you have to look at that, kind of take those transfers out and see where those funds are spending it and kind of bring that all back together to see where that total is as far as our instruction. Am I spending it on, operations? What am I spending it on? So we're going to kind of go through that a little bit to kind of give you what that look is. So the highest level of accounting is in our funds, and the primary focus of the funds we're going to talk about are these funds that are listed here, as most generally are operating funds. The next level of accounting that you're going to see and you're going to hear about is what we call the function level. And it is a part of the uniform accounting system that we are required to follow and comply with in the state of Kansas. So we do have a system that's directed by the feds that we have to do this. The function is kind of considered that who or what area our money is being spent in. And the thing that I want to point out specifically here is when we talk about instruction, I should say when the state talks about instruction or they talk about that 65%, they are only talking about this 1,000 function. And the definition of that is primarily classroom teachers, paras, coaches and club sponsors are actually in that. But it's activities directly with interaction between teachers and students. So this is, you keep hearing more money to the classroom, that's 65%. That's all they're looking at. And what we want to kind of point out here is that there are other things in other function areas that are not being included in that percentage that are very direct to the instruction of our kids and what's going to help them in that educational process. For example, in your 2100 student support, your social workers, your nurses, your psychologists, your speech language teachers that your kids are getting, occupational therapists, PT. By definition, these are activities designed to assess and improve the well-being of students and to supplement the teaching process. But they're not considered in that direct instruction. But yet, how important are those activities for our kiddos? And the 2200 is the other group that's just as important, and that's library media. It's our curriculum. It's the instruction-related technology. It's our professional development. It's those assessment services that help our teachers know where our kids are and where they need improvement. None of those are considered in instruction when you look at those percentages. So it's really important that when you look at the budget and you're trying to evaluate where some of these numbers are coming from, that you help and you kind of know what those definitions are and maybe what's being excluded or not included to help with that conversation and to maybe help others understand where, well, they're not actually including kind of thing. So I wanted to kind of bring those definitions in front of you. The other things that are part of those definitions would be the 2300. That is your general administration, and it talks about your superintendent's office, board clerk, elections. 2400, that's your school administration, your principals, your assistant principals, your athletic directors, anybody that's supporting the operation, directing, and managing at the school. Without those people, it'd be really kind of hard to have instruction in the school. The central administration or central services, that's your business, your warehouse, your printing, the communications department, payroll, human resources, recruiting, wellness, administrative technology. All those things fall into that category, and they're kind of considered the administrative some of the administrative functions. Your operation and maintenance is all in the 2600, and those are your custodians, your maintenance, your grounds, all those things that make sure our buildings are open, comfortable, and safe, and that the grounds and everything are working. So that's another component that it's not instruction, but it's pretty key to the environment that our kiddos are in. 2700, student transportation. It's getting the kids to and from school. I guess without it, we wouldn't have any kids in school to be able to teach them. So it is kind of an important component of instruction in that we get them there. It's also, where we code activity trips and athletics and activity kinds of things. But it's not considered in that 1,000 number. That's going to be that percentage that you hear get that money to the classroom kind of thing. So I kind of wanted to go over those definitions because I think that that's important to understand when you're looking at the budget, whether it's a state document or it's an infographic that you see kind of thrown out there by somebody, or when you hear the legislature say not enough money is getting to instruction. And they're not really looking at a broader picture. They're looking at a pretty narrow picture. So I've taken that information and just those funds that we talked about at the beginning, and I've kind of just done a little graph or kind of chart here for you. These, again, are only funds we're looking at. The bold ones I highlighted on purpose because we're going to look at that as a comparison, but you can kind of see here's where 13-14 we actually spent, 14-15 we actually spent, and then this is where our 15-16 Again, it's just budget, so again, those numbers could be, you know, a little bit different than the actuals, but that's, and if you look at then our percentages, you can see that we're pretty in line. We're not quite at the 65%, but the bold that I mentioned are those categories I talked about just a minute ago that are pretty key components to instruction, and those would be instruction, your student support, your instructional support, your building principals, and student transportation. When you add all those together, you get this 86, 85, and 87. What I will state is those are the ones that we've defined as operating. If you go out to KSDE website, and some of you saw the infographic that the state KASB did, this state average number is what they used. Our number, compared to the state average, was this for those same 2 years. So we are right in line. In fact, we're a little above what KSB kind of showed in their infographic as far as getting to the classroom. That includes all funds except for capital outlay or capital expenses and bond and interest. We've even narrowed it down to just being more your core direct. It doesn't include driver's ed, doesn't include adult ed, doesn't include food services. The state's numbers average and the other one does. But when you look at that, nothing's below 85%. So it's all kind of in the ballpark, and it kind of shows, you know, we are directing dollars to where they need to go. Do you have any questions on that? I just wanted to kind of, this is a graph of it, so you can kind of see the bottom is everything that's going to instruction, student support, you know, the instructional support's red and kind of goes on through.
I mean, I just have to say, I think it's funny that your position in the district would not be considered an important position to, you know, make this work, but thank God we have you, because I can't imagine, and we'd be getting fined $1,000 a day, right? I mean, with the proposals that they have and the information that they want to share, I think it's really hard to say that your position or Dr. Dole's position or Janice's position are all just not necessary or important if you look at what it takes to run a school district.
Well, I think there's the rub, right? That we all understand what it takes to run a school district, but the people who are using that 65% number against us, for the most part, either don't have an understanding or don't care to learn.
Or want to put like 50 kindergartners in a barn with one person and say, okay, learn your math.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't think it's going to happen.
It's a very skewed view. I mean, I try to imagine what a school would look like without all of the instructional staff that the governor says we're not spending money on direct instruction. So he doesn't want to include school nurses. He doesn't want to include librarians. He doesn't want to include any of the school psych, school counselor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How in the world do they expect kids to come into a classroom and be ready to learn if they have all of those needs outside of the classroom? How in the world do they expect a teacher to have enough time in a day to be the nurse and do all of the curriculum work, et cetera? I mean, it's nonsensical, and the fact that they keep debating that and don't actually come and visit one of our classrooms is so incredibly frustrating.
But that implies that they care to learn, and clearly they don't. I mean, this frustrates me to no end when I hear this, and so thank you for pointing this out. But, you know, this is not actually that hard in terms of understanding, and even if there's too much administration, I guess we can just let teachers kind of, you know, do whatever without a principal. But, that's one category among all of these other things. And right, so let's not get kids to school. Let's not heat their buildings, and then run a school district. So, I know we're all kind of expressing our frustrations here. But
where's the social worker? We need some help, right?
Well, or psychologist. So
I am a social worker too, so we're in good hands.
Yeah. But so the thing I just want to express is they don't care. I mean, this is the thing that frustrates me. They could learn this, but that's not what they're interested in. They think we're all getting too much money.
The agenda does not benefit from a real understanding of this. I would really like to see the list of people who vote to kick gifted services out of schools who also talk about failing public schools, because I think if you believe public schools are failing but yet want to vote to kick gifted services out of them, I really don't know that I can talk to you and come up with any kind of consensus.
It'll be the same
Right.
11 people on that committee. It'll
Right.
be Ron Highland and John Bradford and Amanda Grosserode and Kasha Kelly, and I could name a few others, but that's the ones, Jerry Lunn. It's incredibly frustrating to continually inform them of what the facts are that we work in, and to have them just pretend like those facts don't exist.
I think we're done, Kathy. You may proceed.
So to go a little further, when we look at our total, one of the things about public education is that most of our resources are people. So when you look at those same dollars, about 80% of that budget is people, and the other 20% is non-wage. And the reason this flipped a little bit is, if you remember, we quit paying substitutes through wages. We now contract those with outside service. So where they in 13-14 were in wages and non-wages, now they are in this so it kind of flipped a little bit, which is what you're seeing in this percentage. About that dollar amount is about what the flip is. So when you kind of think about the wages, again, there are all those people that we talked about, whether it's your teachers, whether it's your social workers, et cetera. Again, remembering we're only talking about these funds, so we're not talking about food services, which is also significant to the needs of our kids. We're just talking about those ones that require transfers from our general fund. So I'm going to take this a step further and look and see where our wages are in those function areas. So again, when you look at our classroom, student services, those top three, 70%, we're pretty consistent in this district as far as where we've tried to keep dollars focused and where we've tried to use those support dollars. So you can see that of that 80% of our budget that's people, just looking at that 80%, 70% of that is the direct teachers, paras, et cetera. About 8% is your social workers, your speech language teachers, your nurses, your everybody that was in that group, and the 2,200 is the 5. So you can kind of see where that all fits from that total. And so the majority of it is going to the classroom, and then these are those support people that are supporting that. So of that 80%, that's people. This is kind of the breakdown of where those groupings fit.
So I want to point out that line that says school administration and support. That is our principals and vice principals and our support staff at the schools. What people would refer to as our central office staff, less than almost 0.5% of our total salary
Some of that
costs.
is also in that central services number, because that's where the business office would fall, and
right.
Human resources.
But I think the talking point that is most often referred to is superintendents in Kansas are way overpaid, and we're spending so much money on paying those people to do this job. And I think that this highlights very well that we are spending a very reasonable amount of money on highly qualified professional staff to run our district. And so I think that's a great piece of information.
The focus of our dollars really is getting into where we would hope it would get. So the next little slide, before I kind of go, this is kind of where our budget has been spent. I'm going to go into resources and cash balances. So any questions about this? I just kind of wanted to give you a kind of a snippet of some of what you're probably already seeing out there, but more direct to us. So the next slide I'm going to go to is resources for those same funds. So again, that same little group of operating funds that we're talking about, we get money from taxes, state aid, county revenues like your motor vehicle. A little bit of tuition comes in if we have students from out of the country. Our local dollars, this could be reimbursements, miscellaneous incomes. If you look in the budget column, we're not allowed to budget for those kinds of things. Those end up being kind of extra revenue that may or may not happen. It's also where some of your fees come in, your pay-to-play fees, your transportation fees. Some of those things become that reimbursement, and we'll kind of address that here in a minute. Federal grants, that's coming from the special education part of that whole operating budget. And then our state aid for special education. The one thing I am going to point out is 13-14 taxes and state aid, and now all of a sudden it's 17, but if you look at the total, it's about the same. In 14-15, our 20 mills of tax levy no longer comes to us as taxes. It goes to the state and it comes back to us as state aid. So as you see that, it's sort of, we don't get any different money, same money, and especially present in the graph. The dollars didn't change, but the definition of taxes versus state aid changed. So no new money, so to speak, but it is in just how they presented that money coming back to us. So this graph kind of shows that, again, our resources have been kind of what they are as far as new monies or cash coming in. Does that make sense? But you can see that the big change there from green to gray is because that 20 mils is no longer coming to us as taxes. It's now state aid.
Right, and it makes a much better talking point when you're trying to say that schools are getting more money from the state than ever before.
That's right.
It's much easier to say that when you can, launder it.
So the next little pieces I'm going to kind of go into is we have purposely been spending down some of our cash balances. So we do know that our expenditures are in excess of our revenues. And that's been something that we've talked about and we've spent down cash balances to do. So just as the next slide is really kind of what those revenues are and where our expenditures are. And again, in the budget, we can't budget for those reimbursements. And again, those expenditures are kind of, here's what their budget allocations are. Here's what what the contracts of people are. Some people have sick leave or unpaid leaves. You have vacancies for a while. So some of those may change, spend a little different, but all we know is budget right now. Those in place, you can see that we were in a deficit in 13-14. We knew we had increased that deficit going into 14-15. 15-16, we still have a deficit. It's slightly less. If you remember your budget plan last year, we actually came up with some budget considerations and that helped minimize that deficit over and above what we spent. So again, looking to offset something one way as we increase on the other side, trying to find that balance. So as I bring that in, you'll see what's happened to our cash balances. When June 30th, 13, here's kind of what those funds cash balances were. This was our deficit. We used the cash balances to offset that. This was our deficit at the end of last year, and you can see what we've done to our cash balances to offset that. This is the planned, or not planned, but the very projected high level. We don't have a lot of cash balances left to go in these operating funds. We are going to plan on this kind of $1.2 million in reimbursements that'll hopefully add to those resources. If you remember the earlier slide where that number was really small, because I can't count on that through that budget. We know that we're going to pull from the special reserve fund that's for our health care, some of those rate increases over the last couple of years. It'll probably be to the tune of about that now that we're in year 3 of that. I can add that to my cash balances. Still doesn't quite cover, so hopefully something comes in less up here. But to make it balance, if everything were to happen just kind of as it's outlined, we would have to start dipping into contingency reserve up to this amount based on kind of how these numbers might vary. Our current balance as of July 1 of 15 was 6.4. So you're taking off a couple $1 million of that and bringing that down to the $4.45 million mark. Starting to get where that can be, something we really need to have a serious conversation about because, as you can see, there's not a whole lot of other revenues that are out there for us to help kind of bring that into balance. So if the state doesn't give us new money, some of those kinds of things, we only have contingency. Your savings is gone, it's gone. So just giving you kind of that picture. It's a moving target. It moves every day we look at it just because of spending or a miscellaneous income that comes in or some other things. We've brought this in front of you, kind of shared that we're doing that, and so this is just another graphic of kind of where we are with that step, looking at the end of 15-16. Any questions related to that?
I have a question. I just want to make sure I'm looking at this correctly. So you're saying in the far right column, 2015-16, we still have a couple of years before, or how long do we have before we start looking at the contingency reserve?
This year.
This year, okay.
15-16. If other revenues or expenditures don't come in less, we will start dipping into contingency up to that $1.9 million that's out there in the yellow. Assuming everything comes in, we know somebody will underspend. We know we're going to get some more reimbursement money. Those are all variables that are going to continue to happen. We may be in February, but really there's about 2/3 left of our expenditures to happen because a lot of our expenditures happen in June. So everything kind of wraps up right there in the end of May and June. As far as final contracts, substitute costs, all those kinds of things are things that we're trying to manage and contain as we go through the year. That's just sort of that budget column. So.
So it's gotten really simple, gang. We used to carry a lot of fund balances in some other funds. You notice we're not doing that anymore. We really focus that down to contingency. So it really is getting pretty simple in terms of following. If you spend more than you take in, and you've got $6.4 million in contingency, and you start dipping into it, maybe to the tune of about $2 million a year, it gets pretty serious pretty fast.
Couldn't we just borrow some money and then pay the interest only on that? Sorry.
Yeah, or maybe maybe we can figure out some way how to leverage our Capers contributions as they approved doing today. That's the other new thing. They decided they're going to allow the governor to not make Capers contributions, which is essentially borrowing against that particular fund in Capers for the current fiscal year.
And I want to point out, too, it's Kathy's job and our job to make sure we're being very conservative, and she always is. She's always painting you a picture that, I don't want to say worst case scenario, but, and so it's not, every year maybe it's not quite as bad as we predict it's going to be, but even with that, you can see how significantly we've spent down our fund balances, which was by design. We decided to do that because we need to spend money on kids, and the politicians were killing us. I mean, literally, they were killing us with the, beating us up about our fund balances. So we're spending them down. We're spending the money on kids. And now we're at that point where it's not do or die, but it's getting pretty tight.
And remind me, Kathy, the floor in the contingency reserve fund for your, so that you can sleep at night, is $4 million-ish.
If the state provides us revenue and cash flow, that the 4 to 5 is probably okay. December payroll and all costs for payroll and benefits was $7 million. So, there's some other cash balances I don't have included here, but they're very special program targeted food services. They usually carry 3 months worth of expenditures as a cash balance, not pulled into here as an operating because, but it's something the state would probably say as part of your cash balances, just kind of lump it all together. We've tried to avoid trying to pull some of those very specialty programs into this because we don't give them any money. They're self-sufficient, so we wouldn't really want, it's kind of that can I borrow from you kind of situation. So whether there's cash in the bank to make those payrolls, probably. Whether the cash is in the right fund to make those, that would, but they would say pay it anyway. So, so I think you've got that. You've got to kind of balance with it. You're at 9% at 6.4 of your general fund authority. You get down into the 4 and 5, and you're at 4 and 5, 6% of, and what's right for a savings account. You look at your own personal finances and how much do you want to sit there to pay for that car accident somebody has, and all of a sudden you have medical bills that you had no idea was coming versus buy my boat because I've got it sitting over here kind of thing. So it's no different in our world. We have to figure out what that number is going to be and what's the right number for us and where do we want that to be, and collaboratively we need to do that.
Well, and I think especially if, to take that analogy farther, if your employer were as volatile as the Kansas budget right now, you want to have some reserve because you might not get your paycheck, you might not get that state aid on time. And I certainly don't want to have to auto forward my phone to the governor's office if we don't make payroll and every staff person wants to call the board president to complain about why they didn't get paid. I'll figure it out. My husband's very tech savvy.
Absolutely. But, that is part of the discussion. I think in the efficiency audit, the legislative percentages that they wanted us to look at considered it low to moderate. But what KASB kind of pointed out is if you look at where school districts' budgets are, they would consider it more high, moderate to high risk, if not high risk. And that's where the districts seem to be having their balances. So there's a little bit of a, how comfortable are districts versus where that should be. And that's part of that debate going on. So, this kind of lays the groundwork as to, okay, now we have to plan for 16-17. So the things that we do know is that we are in year 2 of the block grant. Funding levels are supposed to remain the same. Again, we've got a long time before June 30, so depends all on the state balances as to what that will look like. But at this point, although they've made some adjustments, it's not to operating, it's been to capers and some other things. So they're saying the dollars will remain the same. We know the formulas in the block grant are pretty much flat except for virtual. When we take the exact same enrollment, not looking at whether they're going to grow or not, full-time goes up a little, part-time goes down, but that net impact to us could generate about $400,000 of new money to us. We do know that we're going to grow potentially, and these are very rough estimates, elementary, middle, and high. So, yeah, estimate of about 165. Again, that could move. The only new money that we potentially get is what they call an over-proration. So if 20 mills across the state brings in more because the assessed valuation is higher, then they'll prorate that back to school districts. This year it's at $25 a kid. Don't know what that'll be in the future. Don't know if they'll even do that, but it's not going to generate a lot of dollars. Right now, because we're not audited, we're not really looking at new facility. Money is changing. It's one-time money anyway. Once it's used, and it's done, we don't get it again after 16, 17, it goes away. So then you're going backwards on those dollars anyway. And special ed stays the same. So if we kind of look at budget assumptions and will there be any new money, maybe about $400,000. Does that kind of make sense? And
yeah.
That's really all kind of related to the virtual. And this is presenting no growth.
So I have a question about special ed funding. If they pull the trigger on taking gifted out of the special ed funding, out of special ed in state statute, does that then affect the weighting?
It affects the dollars that we get because the SPED weighting is based on the FTE of
and we
teachers.
wouldn't be able to count those gifted
And so we
students.
wouldn't get that. So then you would have to make the decision of if we keep gifted, not only will you pay the local part that we're not getting from the weighting formula, you'd have to pick up that weighting.
And it would be a funding cut in our special ed weighting.
Yes.
Yeah.
It won't be as much of a funding cut if you don't keep the program going, but if you keep the program, then you've got to come up with the difference in cost. If that makes sense. So it's one of those things where if you decide to just cut it all together, then it doesn't end up.
If we keep serving kids and meeting their needs
Right.
or not is the
Right.
decision that the legislators would be asking us to make.
But yes,
in
it
that
does change that
circumstance.
weighting amount, and it does change what we would get for those teachers. We don't get 100% of their cost, but we get, it's 27,000 some odd dollars for one FTE. So you would not get those dollars and have to make up that difference.
Well, all of the chatter that I have seen about this is that they are not going to take on writing a new funding formula this year, which I think means that we ought to anticipate that someone at some point will drop a bill saying they're just going to extend the block grant funding for one more year, and that we'll have flat funding for next year. I mean, that's the working assumption I've been thinking about is going into this. I don't see any hope that they would do any different since it's an election year.
So based on those assumptions, I'm going to turn it over to Kyle, and he's going to talk a little bit about budget planning for 16-17, kind of our routine considerations, and then how to expand that or not, and where our next steps are from this, unless there's any questions about kind of the groundwork that we've set out. No? Okay.
So here's some of the things we're thinking about or have been thinking about and need to consider more in the coming weeks and months. Kathy mentioned enrollment increase. So that 165 is about 1.5%. That would have been about the average we've experienced over the course of the last 4 to 5 years. It's ranged anywhere from about 0.5% up to 2%, which this year we were up, if you remember, up over 250 kids with, no new money. So it's just more demands on your staff. And so that's, the estimate is in that range, but it could end up anywhere. Health benefits rate increase, we've been averaging about 6 to 7% on that. That's what we anticipate again. Our loss ratio is still pretty solid. So we're at a comfortable area with that. Obviously, no increase would be better, but it's still manageable. Of course, we have salary for certified, classified, and administrative staff, and a lot of that gets worked out through the negotiations process. So a lot of conversations to still be had. Utilities, we always know that they're just going to go up. So just the cost of operating our schools, and then also you got to take into consideration we have increased square footage with all the bond construction. So that's only going to increase, once again, our costs. Transportation. So, in the coming weeks, we're going to be talking about a transportation contract with First Student. Had multiple meetings with them. Currently, we're at the end of a 5-year contract. For each of those 5 years, the rates go up. So it's not like the rates haven't been going up. It hasn't been steady the whole time. So we've been getting increased costs for our transportation all the way along the way. We've been saving in fuel because that's not a fixed rate in that contract. So it fluctuates, and so we get some benefit for sure when the fuel costs are down. But that's something we're in negotiations with right now, and looking more short term than we are long term with 5 years. But so that'll be coming. Budget evaluation by departments in our division, different divisions. It's something we do annually. We'll be entering into those conversations. Just to be honest with you, when we talk about that with our assistant superintendent team and Dr. Dole and our directors, we're kind of getting at a point now where we're going, I don't know, where else to go without something just not getting done or just absolutely overloading people. So, but we're still going to go through that evaluation process. Other considerations, we've been talking with our different principal teams, elementary, middle, high school, about what they can do differently. Not necessarily making any definitive decisions, but we've talked about at the elementary level, what to do with class size thresholds. So we've talked about some adjustments there that could be made. We've talked about middle school. That, they're doing different things, looking at their middle school schedule. There's a committee that's looking at that right now, and perhaps there's efficiencies to be gained there. High school, they're doing program evaluations, looking at course offerings, so there's some potential efficiencies to be gained there. So there's just a lot of conversations that are happening. Questions to be answered, I guess, is when you asked the question of Kathy, how low is too low with the contingency reserve, and where's our threshold, and obviously other things we need to talk about. Our intent is to put this presentation, this information in front of the Finance Advisory Council and have them chew on this, and help us reflect on, think about, what we need to do going forward, and make some recommendations to the full board as we plan. So that's kind of where we're at.
Any questions?
I like the picture. Yeah.
I think that's a
Very
reflection
appropriate.
of how we all feel this evening. At least I feel that way.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough. It's tough that we started the meeting with a student asking for a particular program that she's passionate about. That, I mean, obviously we want to keep, such tough times ahead, but we've been doing it for a long time. So, yeah.
The only comment I'd make is that I hope you appreciate the professionalism of the staff. I mean, we're just fighting like what to keep our head above water, and we're trying to look at everything we possibly can. And this is really hard work, just really, really hard work. And so, I appreciate the fact that when we're asking our principals to try to look at some efficiency